Welcome to the second semester of U.S. history. Before we get going with that semester, let's look back at the previous semester and recap the events that happened prior to the start of this semester's events. So here we go with previously in U.S. history. This is a recap of events prior to Reconstruction. First Arrivals covers the arrivals of humans in the landmass we refer to as the Americas. New evidence shows that early humans migrated into the Americas about 33,000 years ago. Humans began migrating out of Africa about 130,000 years ago. Thanks to a land bridge, humans began crossing over from Asia to the Americas. Low sea levels allowed for the Bering Land Bridge to exist. Humans will populate South America by 15,000 years ago. Clovis culture is part of the prehistoric Paleo-Indian period. It is named Clovis because of the tools found near Clovis, New Mexico in the 1920s and 1930s. This culture is estimated to have existed 13,500 to 11,000 years ago at the end of the last glacial period. Distinctive native cultural groups begin developing in what will be the United States. These regional groups will develop their own cultures and languages in the Pacific Northwest, California, the Southwest, the Great Plains, Southeast, and the Eastern Woodlands. The arrival of the first Europeans to the Americas occurs 1,000 years ago. Christopher Columbus arrives in the present-day Bahamas in 1492. His arrival will have a dramatic impact on the peoples and cultures in the Americas. He will die not knowing he did not make it to Asia. Amerigo Vespucci will be the European who will realize these are new lands to Europeans. Colonial America begins with the founding of Jamestown, Virginia, and in this presentation goes until the start of the French and Indian War. In this time period, British America would develop into 23 colonies and territories in North America. 13 of those colonies would be situated on the Atlantic coast and would eventually form the United States. The concept of salutary neglect would develop as well in that the British colonies would govern themselves independent of the mother country. The period of colonial slavery America begins with the arrival of the first enslaved people through to the independence of the United States. The first enslaved Africans would arrive in 1619 in Virginia. This begins a period of enslavement in what will be the United States until the abolishment of slavery in 1865. The American Revolution is more of a period of time than simply a specific event. Here the years span from 1756 to 1791. This includes the French and Indian War, which is an imperial war between the European powers, but a war that leads to the American Revolutionary War, which itself fits into the imperial wars of the time. From the French and Indian War comes the road to revolution, as the British need to pay for that war and begin taxing the colonists. The 12-year period is a build-up to a revolt and eventually a declaration of independence. The Revolutionary War begins at Lexington and Concord in 1775. When peace attempts fail, the Second Continental Congress declares independence in July of 1776. The French joined the war against Britain in 1778. The British surrender in 1781, and the Peace Treaty of Paris of 1783 makes the independence of the United States official. The period of American Revolution is not finished with the war, as a government is established. The first government under the Articles of Confederation establishes a weak central government with little power, while the states retain most of the power. When Shays' Rebellion proves a stronger government is needed, a constitutional convention is called. In Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, delegates to the convention meet to revise the Articles of Confederation before deciding to create a whole new governing document. The new Constitution creates a stronger central government and weaker state governments. There would be a legislative branch that makes the laws, an executive to enforce the laws, and a judiciary to clarify the laws. From the convention, the Constitution would go to the states for debate and ratification. Just 9 of the 13 states would be needed for it to go into effect. New Hampshire became the 9th state, and the new government began in March of 1789 with George Washington elected unanimously as the first president. The first Congress writes the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and they are ratified in 1791. That brings the period of the American Revolution to an end. The early republic here is defined as being from 1789 to 1825. This period covers the first 5 presidencies. During Washington's presidency, the judiciary is established through the Judiciary Act. Just as Shays' Rebellion was a challenge to the Articles of Confederation, the Whiskey Rebellion was the first serious challenge for the new Constitution. Washington helped put down that rebellion. His farewell address would be words followed by future generations of Americans well into the 20th century, especially in terms of foreign alliances. The Adams presidency would try to avoid war with France while restricting rights through the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Jefferson presidency would expand the country westward with the Louisiana Purchase and end the importation of enslaved people, while the Madison presidency would bring another war with Britain in the War of 1812, which would see the burning of the young capital city in 1814. Monroe's presidency would be set in an era of good feelings, while also establishing a sectional America through the Missouri Compromise, with free states above the 36 degrees 30-minute line and slave states below. The Monroe Doctrine warned Europeans to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, which would be the sphere of influence of the United States, with the British essentially enforcing it to protect their own trading interests in the New World. Part of this early 19th century America is the market revolution. This is a revolution in commerce through the new technologies of the Industrial Revolution. This revolution helps to remake the United States into an economic powerhouse in the years to come. From 1820 to 1840, there is a spread of democracy, crusades for reform, all while the stain of enslavement tarnishes the concept of the United States. Democracy expands beyond property-owning white males to all white males. There are attempts at slave revolts. Reform movements begin, such as reforming the prison system, education, and temperance. Abolitionism is on the rise. The start of the fight for women's suffrage begins in this time period too. From 1840 to 1861 is the period where the division in the House that is the United States grows. Manifest destiny is the belief that the U.S. is destined by God to grow westward to the Pacific Ocean. To achieve that, the Mexican-U.S. War has to happen, as from that war would come California and the Southwest. Southerners with a desire to expand westward with their property, aka enslaved humans, will spark the need for a new compromise to stave off conflict between the North and the South. Establishing popular sovereignty in the Kansas-Nebraska territories will bring about Bleeding Kansas, a mini-civil war and prelude to the larger-scaled conflict. The election of 1860, which puts Republican Abraham Lincoln in the White House, triggers the secession crisis, leading to disunion and civil war. The Civil War is between the Union in the North and the rebels in the South. The war is a struggle over slavery. If it is about states' rights, economics, or federal authority, it all comes down to the issue of the institution of the enslavement of human beings. The first shots are fired at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, but the first battle is the First Battle of Bull Run. The South fights for its independence to govern themselves and protect the institution of slavery, while the North is fighting to preserve the Union. While the war rages on, the Union passes legislation like the Homestead Act, which will spur westward movement, as well as beginning to build the Transcontinental Railroad. One of the deadliest days in U.S. history will be September 17, 1862, during the Battle of Antietam, a battle which will lead to the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and establishing that the war isn't just about preserving the Union, but also abolishing slavery in the United States. The war will end with the surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865. With Lincoln's assassination, the South lost their peaceful advocate and left the reconstruction of the United States in the hands of his Vice President, Andrew Johnson. Next session, we will begin the history of America's rebirth through Reconstruction, as the nation rebuilds the house divided, hoping to live up to the nation's founding document that all men are created equal.